Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, he left me his house. It was a beautiful old place with lots of memories for both of us. I had my own apartment in the city for work, so I didn't need to move in right away. My father had been struggling financially after his second marriage. His new wife didn't work, and they were barely making ends meet. I felt bad for them and offered to let them stay in my inherited house rent-free. I only had two conditions. Don't touch my childhood bedroom and leave my grandfather's office exactly as it was. When I made the offer, my father was shocked and asked if I was serious about letting them live there without paying rent. I confirmed that I would even cover the utilities and property taxes and just needed him to respect those two rooms because they were important to me. He enthusiastically promised they would take good care of the place. For 7 years, this arrangement worked fine. I'd visit occasionally to check on things and spend time in my old room, surrounded by memories. But something changed in my father over time. He started acting like he owned the place. It started with small things, moving furniture without asking, repainting walls. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My father called one day with a demanding tone telling me I needed to come clear out my room. When I asked why I would do that, he explained that his stepdaughter needed to move in and required a proper bedroom. He claimed the guest room was too small for her, my room was bigger, and since I was hardly ever there, I should give it up. I said that wasn't happening. I told him she could use the guest room instead, reminding him of our agreement that my room stays as is. My father accused me of being selfish, pointing out that I didn't even live there while they did, and claimed it was ridiculous to keep a room empty when someone needed it. I told him the answer was no, insisting the guest room was perfectly fine. The next day, I decided to visit the house to make sure my room was still intact. When I arrived, the locks had been changed. My father was standing at the door with his arms crossed. He refused to let me in unless I agreed to clear out my room, declaring that this was their home now. I reminded him that it was my house and that I'd let him live there for free for 7 years. With a smirk, he responded that possession is 9/10 of the law, and he possessed it now. I had no choice but to contact my lawyer and the police. Within a week, my father, his wife, and his stepdaughter were legally evicted. A few weeks later, my girlfriend was alone at the house when my father showed up. He told my girlfriend he needed to talk to me, his child. Later, she described how he handed her an actual written list of food they wanted for Christmas dinner and gifts they expected. He told her that since we were living in the house now, we should host them for the holidays. When I asked what she said to him, my girlfriend told me she threatened to call the police if he didn't leave immediately. She said he looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe she would say no. We laughed about it, thinking it was over, but the next day, there was another knock at the door. My girlfriend texted me while I was at work to let me know my father was there again. When I got home, she told me the latest demand. She explained that apparently he had called my mother and found out she was taking us to Europe for New Year's. Now he was demanding we convince my mother to take them too, or that we pay for their trip ourselves. I expressed disbelief that he had called my mother, noting they'd been divorced for 16 years and hadn't spoken once during that time. The next day, he showed up again while we were both home. The moment I opened the door, he insisted I needed to talk to my mother. He complained that it wasn't fair that she was taking us two to Europe and not them. I questioned why she would take him, pointing out he was her ex-husband who she hadn't spoken to in 16 years. He insisted it was because we're family, and family should be together for the holidays. I reminded him that family doesn't try to steal rooms from each other or change locks on each other. He dismissed this as different, claiming he had to do that for his stepdaughter, and then tried to return to the topic of the Europe trip. My girlfriend and I couldn't help it. We started laughing. The audacity was just too much. He demanded to know what was so funny, his face getting red. I managed to explain between laughs that we found it hilarious that after everything that had happened, he thought we owed him a European vacation. He stormed off while we were still laughing. I installed security cameras after that and made sure all my other properties were secured. I warned my tenants about him in case he tried approaching them. But the story wasn't over yet. While my girlfriend and I were in Europe with my mother, I got a call from my uncle, my father's brother. My uncle told me he was selling his house and leaving town and asked if I was interested in buying it. He sounded desperate. This house was special. It was my grandfather's childhood home. Before he died, my grandfather had told me he regretted giving it to my uncle and wished it could go to my cousin Marie, my uncle's daughter from his first marriage, who he never acknowledged. I made my uncle a low offer, saying I'd pay in installments. He refused, so I sweetened the deal, offering the same low price but paid immediately when I returned from Europe, plus covering all his moving expenses. He agreed right away. When we returned, I bought the house and immediately transferred it to my cousin Marie. She flew in from Europe to handle the paperwork. What I didn't know was that my father had also tried to buy the house from my uncle. When he found out I purchased it, he went there to confront me, not knowing I'd already given it to Marie. The doorbell camera caught him breaking in when no one answered. I called the police immediately, and they arrived quickly. Father was shocked when he realized the house wasn't mine but belonged to a cousin he barely knew. Marie pressed charges, and combined with his previous actions, my father ended up sentenced to several months in jail. I later discovered why my uncle was so desperate to sell. He'd angered his wife's family and needed to leave town quickly. I texted him warning him not to share information with my father again, or I'd tell his in-laws where to find him. He blocked my number immediately. With my father in jail and my uncle gone for good, I could finally enjoy my life with my girlfriend without worrying about unwanted visitors showing up with ridiculous demands. My grandfather would have been proud. Not only did I stand my ground, but I fulfilled his wish of getting his childhood home back to Marie. I work at a restaurant called the Golden Plate. The owner, who's also our manager, treats us with respect, something hard to find in the restaurant industry. I started as a hostess right out of high school, mostly because I needed money for college. Eventually, I worked my way up to waitressing, which meant better tips but also dealing with interesting customers. This Saturday night was chaos. We were completely booked, with a waiting list that stretched out the door. I had been on my feet for 7 hours straight, running between the kitchen and my 6 tables, barely having time to catch my breath. My shoes were killing me, and I had already changed my apron once after spilling marinara sauce all over it. Around 9 p.m., a group of about 8 young adults, probably college students, were seated in my section near the back. From the moment they arrived, they were loud, snapping their fingers to get my attention and making demands before they'd even settled in. One of them immediately told me they would need separate checks. I forced a smile and told them that wouldn't be a problem at all. When I took their drink orders, I noticed they were all dressed similarly, trendy clothes that looked expensive but uncomfortable. They had that entitled energy that immediately put me on edge. You develop a sixth sense for trouble in this job. While I was waiting for their drinks at the bar, I overheard snippets of their conversation. They were discussing the lighting in the restaurant being perfect for filming, how their followers would love the content, and that they needed to hit 10,000 views or the algorithm would bury them. I should have known right then what was coming, but I was too busy to really process it. I delivered their drinks and took their food orders without incident, though they changed their minds multiple times and asked detailed questions about every ingredient. About 20 minutes later, as I was delivering a birthday cake to an elderly couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, I heard a commotion. The restaurant suddenly got much louder, with several tables looking toward the back with annoyed expressions. I turned around to see 3 of the young adults standing on my freshly cleaned tables, doing some kind of choreographed dance routine while another one filmed. They were singing, if you could call it that, at the top of their lungs, completely oblivious to everyone around them. An older gentleman at the next table covered his ears and called out to me, asking if I could do something about the noise. I quickly set down the cake and rushed over to the group. I asked them to get down immediately and explained they were disturbing other customers. One of them, wearing sunglasses indoors, dismissed me and said they just needed one more take. I told them they couldn't stand on our tables because it was a safety hazard and they were disrupting everyone's dinner. They completely ignored me and restarted their routine even louder. I spotted our manager coming out of his office, already scanning the room for the source of the disturbance. I hurried over to him and explained that the customers in the back were filming a video, standing on tables, and wouldn't listen to me. He nodded, straightened his tie, and assured me he would handle it. Our manager approached their table. He was in his 50s, unassuming and soft-spoken, but he had this quiet authority that usually commanded respect. He greeted them politely and explained that while he understood they were having a good time, they needed to sit down and lower their voices. He clarified that standing on tables was against restaurant policy and their noise was disturbing other guests. One woman with perfectly styled hair and an attitude twice its size, we'll refer to with Karen, rolled her eyes dramatically. She complained that they were just trying to have fun and questioned why it was such a big deal. The manager acknowledged their desire to have fun but asked them to consider that other customers were trying to enjoy their meals peacefully, and their behavior was disrupting that experience. Another person from the group bragged about how many followers they had and suggested they could give our restaurant amazing exposure. The manager politely declined the offer, explaining that we respect all customers' right to dine in comfort. He asked them to sit down or they would need to leave. Karen dismissed their behavior as just making a video. The situation escalated quickly. They started arguing, their voices getting louder. Other tables were now openly staring. Some families with children were getting up to leave. Karen complained loudly that the situation was ridiculous since they were paying customers. The manager acknowledged this but pointed out that everyone else in the restaurant was also a paying customer who came for a peaceful dinner. That's when Karen grabbed her water glass and threw it straight at our manager. The entire restaurant gasped as water drenched his shirt and tie. He stood there for a moment, water dripping down his face, his expression shifting from patience to fury. The manager told them that was enough and demanded they all leave immediately and not return. The group started gathering their things, muttering and cursing. As they stood up, Karen lunged forward suddenly, her hand raised to slap our manager. What happened next shocked everyone. Our quiet, mild-mannered manager sidestepped with unexpected grace, caught her wrist mid-air, and in one smooth motion had her arm behind her back, in a restraining hold. The woman yelped in surprise. Karen cried out demanding he let go of her and accusing him of assault. The manager corrected her, explaining that what she had just attempted was assault and asking her to leave peacefully before he called the police. One of the group members aggressively told the manager to let her go. Another employee had already called 911. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived. After talking to multiple witnesses and reviewing our security footage, they handcuffed Karen and 2 others who had been aggressive. The remaining group members slunk out in embarrassment as their friends were escorted to police cars outside. The entire restaurant applauded when the police finally drove away. Later that night, as we were cleaning up, my manager explained that he'd been practicing karate for nearly 30 years. He joked that he never expected to need those reflexes for customer service. The next day, our restaurant was busier than ever. Turns out one of our regular customers had recorded the whole incident, and it had gone viral. Just not in the way those TikTok wannabes had planned. Back in my military days, I worked as an aviation electronics technician, and after spending 3 years at a heavy maintenance facility where we tore down planes to their bones and rebuilt them, I got transferred to an operational squadron where planes actually flew missions. I was assigned to night shift, which ran from 4 p.m. to midnight. This was when most preventative maintenance happened since the planes weren't flying. When I arrived, I replaced 2 other electronics techs who had been working that shift for about a year. Within my first week, I noticed something odd. The workload that had supposedly kept 2 guys busy for 8 hours each night, I was knocking it out in about 4 hours. So naturally, I started asking for more work. That's when things got interesting. Our squadron had this ridiculous rivalry going on between the electronics technicians, who everyone called tweets, and the mechanics, nicknamed nose pickers. The two techs I replaced were apparently the ringleaders of this childish feud from the electronics side. I never understood workplace drama like this. Back at my old station, we all worked together because, well, that's the job. So when I saw some mechanics struggling with a heavy wing component one night, I didn't hesitate to climb up and help. The night shift chief, who supervised all maintenance, came around the corner and saw me up on the stand. He loudly asked who the new guy was on the check stand. One of the mechanics called back that I was the new tweet they'd been telling him about. The chief gruffly warned them not to let me screw anything up. Coming from this crusty old chief, that was practically a marriage proposal. From that night on, the mechanics and I got along just fine. The two tweets I replaced didn't like this one bit. They started spreading rumors that I was doing shoddy work and even pencil whipping, signing off on maintenance I hadn't actually performed. This was a serious accusation in aircraft maintenance, where people's lives depend on our work. My direct supervisor, the electronics chief, caught wind of these rumors. He decided to set a trap to see if I was really doing my job. He assigned me to perform preventative maintenance on the aircraft's radar system. Now, accessing the radar on our C-130 aircraft required opening something called a radome, an enormous heavy dome covering the nose of the aircraft. This thing was massive, about 8 feet high and 7 feet wide. To open and close it properly required several people pulling with straps to align 4 screw holes perfectly, because after thousands of flight hours, the airframe gets slightly twisted. I knew exactly what the chief was doing. If I signed off the maintenance without opening that radome, he'd know I was pencil whipping. If I complained I couldn't do it without help, he'd call me incompetent since the 2 previous tweets managed just fine. So I took the assignment with a smile. Then I went straight to the night shift chief. I politely explained that I needed to open the radome that night for radar preventative maintenance and asked if I could get some assistance when it was time to close it up. He casually replied that it wouldn't be a problem and told me to just give him a holler when I was ready. That radome was a nightmare to close, even with 6 of us pulling straps and pushing. It took nearly 2 hours, and I ended up buying beers for the mechanics afterward. But it was worth it. The next morning, I was called into the electronics chief's office. The 2 former night shift tweets were there, smirking like they'd won the lottery. The electronics chief accused me directly, saying there was no way I could have completed the radar maintenance the previous night. When I asked why he thought that, he explained that I would have needed to open the radome and I hadn't asked anyone for help closing it. I replied innocently, asking why I would ask day shift personnel to help me during night shift. The chief responded that it takes at least 4 people to close a radome. I explained that I never claimed to have done it by myself, as the night shift had plenty of people who could help. The first former tweet immediately jumped in, insisting that the mechanics would never help a tweet. The second one agreed, specifically mentioning they wouldn't help with something like a radome. I stood my ground and told them that the mechanics had indeed helped me. I added that I didn't appreciate being called a liar or accused of pencil whipping and pointedly asked where those rumors had come from in the first place. The room went silent. Everyone was staring at the 2 former tweets. The electronics chief ordered us all to stay put while he stepped out for a moment. When he returned a few minutes later, he told me that he had spoken with the night shift chief, who confirmed they had helped me close the radome. He dismissed me but told the 2 former tweets to remain behind. As I walked out, I could hear the electronics chief starting to tear into those 2. I didn't see much of them after that. They were moved to different shifts and eventually to different squadrons. The electronics chief started giving me more responsibility, and I eventually became the night shift supervisor for all electronics maintenance. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.